The sound of a coffee cup shattering on the floor froze everyone inside the thinking bean. In the corner sat a black woman, her bright eyes quietly fixed on the laptop screen, beside a thick stack of documents marked with colorful sticky notes. No one knew those pages contained enough evidence to shake an entire police department. That woman was Dr. Naomi Carter, a law professor and civil rights investigator for the U.S. Department of Justice. That morning, sunlight flooded Maple Grove, streaming through the cafe windows and lighting her composed face. Naomi had just finished a report on traffic stops conducted under false pretenses, all sharing one common pattern: the targets were black. For 15 years, she had dedicated her life to exposing the hidden structures of injustice, disguised as order and discipline, but never had the darkness felt so close. Checking her phone, she saw a message from Jamal Thomas, a high school principal and the key witness in her investigation. When she heard his trembling voice over the phone, Naomi immediately knew something had changed. He whispered as if someone might be listening. "They've been following my son Naomi, twice in 1 week. I can't risk it anymore." A heavy silence. Then the line went dead. Naomi set the phone down, her hand clenched so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The sting of disappointment cut deep, but instead of despair, she nodded slowly, as if adding one more crucial piece of evidence to her case file. Witness intimidation. That was what she needed. Not for revenge, but to prove the machinery of fear, how power sustains itself through silence. Naomi closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Her father once told her justice doesn't come from those who shout the loudest, but from those who stay calm when the world wants them to lose control. Today she would stay calm, but the world was about to lose control because of her. To avoid being tracked, Naomi decided to leave her office. The Thinking Bean. A cozy cafe and bookstore on Main Street was her usual refuge when she needed quiet. The air was warm, the scent of coffee mingled with new paper, and soft golden light spilled across the shelves. She chose a table near the window, opened her laptop, and spread the documents across the table. It seemed like an ordinary morning, but fate always chooses the calmest places to begin a storm. About 15 minutes later, the cafe manager, Thomas Kane, appeared. A white man in his 50s with a stiff wooden posture, he watched Naomi from behind the counter. The papers, the legal notes, the glowing DOJ logo on her laptop, everything about her irritated him. In his mind, the explanation was simple. A black woman sitting in an upscale cafe with stacks of documents and a laptop couldn't possibly be legitimate. Probably a fraud or an impersonator. "This isn't an office," he muttered, gripping his phone tighter. When Naomi ordered another latte, the young barista hesitated because Thomas had already intercepted her at the counter. "Who is that customer?" he asked in a low, suspicious tone. "She's a professor at Lincoln University," the barista replied. Thomas scoffed. "A professor? Since..." "When do professors work in coffee shops? Be careful, there have been scams with fake lawyers around lately." Then he called the police, reporting a suspicious person engaging in fraudulent activity. Naomi had no idea she'd just become a target. She only felt a strange chill creep through the air, cutting through the cafe's warmth. A soft jazz tune played in the background, but something made her look up. Through the window, she saw 2 police officers approaching. One was heavy-set with a buzz cut and cold eyes, the other younger, more rigid, but visibly uncertain. Dean Walker and Matt Cooper, names Naomi recognized from the very case files she was investigating. As they approached her table, she quietly set her phone down and tapped the screen to activate the recorder. Walker spoke bluntly. Identification. Naomi looked up, her voice calm and steady. May I know the reason? There's been a report of someone using fake documents in the area. She smiled slightly, her gaze sharp as steel. Really? Then this is convenient. I'm currently collecting data on systemic racial profiling. It seems we're about to create a live example together. Walker froze, confused by her tone. Cooper glanced at him, ready to intervene, but stayed silent. The entire cafe watched. A waitress stood still. 2 students at the next table began recording on their phones. Naomi's voice remained gentle, but every word pierced through the veneer of authority like a blade. And how exactly do you plan to verify that by my skin color? Walker's tone hardened. Don't get smart. Show me your ID. Naomi slowly slid a card across the table, the Department of Justice seal glinting under the light. Walker leaned in, squinting, his lips moving as he read the embossed line, Federal Civil Rights Division Investigator Naomi Carter. For a few seconds, time seemed to stop. The man who had just tried to detain her now realized he was facing someone who could end his career with a single report. Naomi gave a faint smile. You might want to take notes on this conversation. It could appear in my audit report. The words were soft as air, but landed like a hammer. Walker froze. Cooper took an instinctive step back. Outside, the sound of another police siren blared. Thomas Kane was rushing to greet backup, unaware he had just triggered a storm that would soon sweep across the entire city. That morning, in a small cafe in Maple Grove, Justice sat quietly in plain sight. And when provoked, it knew how to speak. Naomi Carter. The woman once dismissed for the color of her skin was about to make an entire system bow its head. The afternoon drifted by with sunlight glimmering through the windows of the thinking bean. The crowd had thinned, leaving only a few quiet readers. Naomi still sat there, her face calm, unreadable. Yet inside her, the storm had begun. She knew Walker and Cooper weren't there because of a manager's baseless report. They were there because of her and because of what they were trying to hide. She replayed the audio file. The conversation echoing clearly, the harsh tone, the threats the moment Walker froze when he saw her Department of Justice badge. Every detail was captured perfectly. Naomi saved a copy to an encrypted cloud drive, then picked up her phone to call the office. I think they're tracking me, she said curtly to the tech assistant. Initiate Level 3 security protocol. The voice on the other end responded steadily. Understood, Dr. Carter. When she hung up, a memory flashed across her mind. Her father standing at the pulpit of their old Atlanta church, telling the congregation, the righteous don't need to shout to be heard, but when they do speak, even power must fall silent. Naomi had grown up with words like those. She knew silence could be the sharpest weapon of all. Outside, 2 patrol cars still idled by the curb, their red and blue lights faint in the late afternoon sun. Walker leaned against the hood, cigarette in hand, his face tense, smoke curling around him like a dark halo. I don't buy that. She's really a federal agent, he muttered to Cooper. People like that always fake authority to scare others. Cooper answered softly, uncertain. I saw the real DOJ SEAL Dean. We should report this to the captain. Walker ground the cigarette under his boot and clenched his jaw. Leave it to me. No one threatens me and walks away unpunished. His words drifted on the wind, blending with the sound of traffic, but they cut like a blade, a promise of wounds yet to come. Walker didn't know that within hours, every move he made would be exposed. Naomi left the cafe, walking slowly along the tree-lined sidewalk. Maple Grove looked picture-perfect, clean, orderly, and as deceptive as the serve and protect signs she had seen too many times before. She stopped by a corner market, bought a bottle of water, and watched people pass by, clearly seeing the invisible divide splitting the world in two. One side still believed in the law, the other feared being crushed by it. Her phone rang. It was Jamal Thomas, the high school principal. She answered immediately. Naomi. His voice trembled. The police came to my house. They asked about my interview with you. She inhaled deeply, keeping her voice calm. Did they have a warrant? No. But they said if I don't cooperate, they'll reopen my son's accident case from last year. I can't. His voice broke. Naomi closed her eyes, her chest tightening. Jamal, I understand. You don't have to say another word. From now on, I'll handle the rest. She ended the call, her gaze shifting from sorrow to resolve. Back in her 10th floor apartment, Naomi opened her laptop and accessed the federal database. She began scanning complaints against the Brookdale Police Department over the last 3 years, over 100 cases, only 8 investigated, none resulting in disciplinary action. The pattern was all too familiar: concealment, erasure, and retaliation against whistleblowers. She refined the search parameters, and 2 names appeared on the screen: Dean Walker and Matt Cooper. Her hand trembled slightly. The same 2 men who had confronted her that morning were among those investigated for excessive use of force against black citizens. The most recent victim had been a 16-year-old boy, and the case was closed after only 3 days. Naomi printed the documents, her eyes sharp as freshly honed steel. If you want to threaten me, she whispered, I'll teach you what evidence really means. Meanwhile, at the Brookdale Police Department, Captain Harold Bennett sat in his office, a glass of whiskey beside a thick folder. When Walker entered, the captain looked up. I heard you had an incident with a federal agent, he said. Walker's tone was defensive. It was just a misunderstanding. She's nothing. Bennett smirked. You don't know Carter, do you? She's the one investigating us, and now you've just given her the perfect reason to dig deeper. Walker's face drained of color. What do you want me to do? Bennett leaned back in his chair, his voice dropping low. Do nothing. Sometimes to put out a fire, you have to pour the right kind of fuel. As night settled over Maple Grove, Naomi stood by her window watching the street lights flicker like artificial stars. She could hear her heartbeat slow and heavy. Somewhere in the city, those in power were plotting their next move. But they had forgotten one thing: she was no longer just a black woman wrongly suspected in a coffee shop. She was the one holding the map to the truth. And by morning, she would take a step that would make all of Brookdale step back. The next morning, the thinking bean opened as usual, the smell of freshly roasted coffee blending with soft background music. No one knew that today this quiet cafe would become the epicenter of an earthquake. Naomi arrived early, dressed in a beige coat, her hair neatly tied back. Her expression calm, as if she hadn't stayed up all night preparing for what was about to happen. On the table, her laptop was already open, beside a thick stack of files printed from the federal system data she knew could bring down the entire power structure in Brookdale. The barista recognized her and smiled warmly. Your usual latte? Naomi nodded with a polite smile. Everything appeared peaceful, but inside, her focus was wound tight as a wire. She knew Walker and Cooper wouldn't stop. The system was afraid, and when power feels fear, it always strikes first. Around 10 o'clock, the glass door swung open. Thomas Kane, the cafe manager, walked in, followed by 2 uniformed officers. Walker in front, Cooper behind. The air turned heavy as lead. Some customers turned to look, a few raised their phones. Naomi didn't move her eyes, briefly catching the reflection of the police badge glinting under the light. Walker strode straight to her, his voice clipped and sharp. "Ma'am, we need to verify your identity and your activities here." Naomi looked up at him, her calm almost frightening. "Verify? I believe we did that yesterday. What's new, Officer Walker?" He hesitated for a second, but forced his tone to stay firm. "We received a report claiming you used false identification to collect personal information. This is standard procedure." "Standard," Naomi repeated softly. "Do you know that in 80% of so-called standard checks like these, the targets are people of color?" She gently picked up her phone, placing it face up on the table, the screen glowing. "I'll be recording just to ensure transparency." "I'm sure you don't object." Cooper glanced at Walker and muttered, "Dean, don't." But Walker brushed him off, hand on his hip. "It's fine. We're following protocol." He leaned forward, reaching for the folder on the table. Naomi placed her hand over it, her voice low, but resonant, like a command. "These documents are under the jurisdiction of the Department of Justice. Without a warrant, you are not authorized to touch them." The air seemed to solidify. Walker clenched his jaw, then suddenly raised his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Quite a coincidence, Carter. We just received notice about a fraud case under the same name. You might be involved." A wave of murmurs spread through the cafe. Naomi said nothing, only met his gaze, and the look in her eyes made him step back half a pace. "Dean Walker," she said clearly, each word deliberate. "Do you know what you just did? That's called intentional defamation, and it's all being recorded." The young barista, Brianna, trembling, took out her phone and started filming. Another customer, a college student, lifted his camera too. They didn't realize they were becoming witnesses to a moment that would soon ignite across social media. Walker tried to mask his unease by raising his voice again. "We're just doing our job. You're obstructing an investigation." Naomi remained motionless, her composure so steady it made him seem smaller. "An investigation or intimidation, Officer Walker? Do you think the people here can't see the difference?" Cooper stepped forward, his voice pleading. "Come on, Dean, that's enough." But Walker moved closer, leaning in to whisper, "You think I'm scared? I know what you're trying to do. You can't take down an entire police department?" Naomi smiled faintly. "You're mistaken. I don't have to take it down. I just have to make people see it." A sudden sound cut through the tension. The door burst open. Ethan Ruiz, an independent journalist, walked in with a camera on his shoulder. He had been following civil rights cases, and that morning he received an anonymous message. "If you want to see the truth, be at the Thinking Bean at 10. He switched on his camera lens, aimed at Naomi's table. Walker stepped in front of him, barking, "No recording here." Ethan replied firmly, "This is a public space, officer, and I have the right to document your actions." The air tightened. The only sound left was the faint dripping of coffee. Naomi rose slowly, adjusted her coat, and said, "You've just given me the final piece of evidence I needed. Thank you, Officer Walker." Then she turned to Ethan. "Mr. Ruiz, make sure the public sees every second of what happens today." Walker's face flushed with anger. "You're under arrest for obstructing police work." He grabbed her wrist, roughly pulling hard. Gasps erupted. Chairs toppled. The camera swung. Naomi didn't resist. She spoke clearly, her voice steady and deliberate. "You are assaulting a federal investigator. Your actions are being broadcast live right now." Walker froze, his hand still gripping her wrist, but his eyes flickered with panic. Cooper stepped back, looking around at the dozens of phones now recording. There was no way out. Naomi's voice rose calm and precise, cutting through the heavy air like a blade. You have just turned an internal investigation into a federal crime. The words hit like a hammer. Outside, sirens wailed as more police units arrived, unaware they were about to watch their own officers caught in their own trap before the public's eyes. As Naomi was led out between two lines of stunned onlookers, Ethan filmed every step. Every gaze followed her, a mixture of shock and admiration. At the door, she turned to look at Walker, a thin smile curving her lips. Sometimes, to expose the darkness, you need its own hand to flip the switch. And at that very moment, in the corner of the cafe, Ethan's phone buzzed with a notification from social media. Bookstore justice is trending. The storm was no longer a metaphor, it had truly begun. Naomi stepped out of the thinking bean as the wind rustled through the trees, red marks from the handcuffs still imprinted on her wrists. Every movement she made was captured by dozens of raised phones. The blare of police sirens tore through the quiet streets of Maple Grove, shattering the town's calm and drawing a crowd of curious, outraged onlookers. Surrounded by voices and cameras, Naomi never bowed her head. She walked straight ahead, her steps steady, her gaze unwavering, like someone who already knew how this would end. Walker gripped her arm tightly, his voice dry and strained between heavy breaths. "You think recording will save you?" Naomi looked at him, her tone soft as air, but sharp enough to make him freeze. "I don't need saving, officer. I just need evidence." They pushed her into the car, the door slamming shut. Outside, Ethan Ruiz kept filming his camera, trembling slightly with adrenaline. He was live streaming as he whispered, "This is history, Naomi. You're rewriting history." Comments flooded beneath the video. "Who is she? Why are they arresting that woman? This is clear abuse of power." The hashtag bookstore justice began gaining thousands of shares by the minute. Inside the patrol car, Walker drove in silence, his face flushed with anger. Cooper sat in the front seat, glancing through the rearview mirror at Naomi, who sat upright, her eyes fixed calmly on the window. The sunlight caught her hair, turning her profile into something sculptural, unyielding, and dignified. Cooper swallowed hard. "Dean, we're in the wrong." Walker tightened his grip on the wheel. "Shut up. I know what I'm doing." But his voice shook as if trying to convince himself more than anyone else. At the Brookdale Police Department, the interrogation room was cold and bare. Naomi was led inside, her wrists still bound. The fluorescent light cast a harsh glow on her face, both weary and defiant. A young officer brought her a cup of water and placed it gently on the table. "Thank you," Naomi said quietly, then looked up at the camera in the corner and smiled faintly. "Are you sure it's recording, or is it just there for show?" The young officer flushed and turned away. The door opened. Captain Harold Bennett entered, tall, broad-shouldered, his silver hair slicked back, his voice honed sharp as a blade. "Dr. Carter," he said, emphasizing her title but lacing it with mockery instead of respect. "I apologize for this misunderstanding, but you must understand that recording and obstructing police operations can have serious consequences." Naomi tilted her head slightly, her tone calm and deliberate. "Serious consequences for whom, Captain? For those enforcing the law, or for those abusing it?" The air grew heavy. Bennett leaned back in his chair, hands clasped. "You know, he said I used to admire people like you. But there's a fine line between justice and arrogance. You just crossed it." Naomi met his gaze without flinching. Justice has no line, Captain. Only those who fear it draw boundaries. He gave a dry laugh, standing. Good. Keep that conviction. But don't expect your phone to be returned. Naomi leaned slightly forward, her tone composed. That's fine. I have something stronger than a phone. The data's already backed up. Her calm smile made Bennett pause. What did you say? Technology is remarkable, isn't it? Especially when it knows how to recognize injustice. Bennett said nothing, staring out the window. Walker stood waiting in the hallway, his face pale with unease. Bennett opened the door and signaled for him to enter. Walker, she says her data is backed up? What's your plan for that? Walker hesitated. I confiscated her phone. She's probably bluffing. You'd better hope you're not stupid enough to be wrong, Bennett growled. Inside the room, Naomi heard every word. She smiled faintly. No shouting, no struggle, just let them expose themselves. A knock came at the door. A young officer stepped in with an envelope. Sir, emergency court order. Bennett tore it open, his face draining of color. What is this? An order from Judge Monroe? The officer replied, demanding Dr. Carter's immediate release and preservation of all evidence related to her arrest. Naomi rose, her eyes bright with restrained fire. It seems justice arrived sooner than expected, Captain. Bennett straightened, forcing composure. You've won a round, Carter. But this game isn't over. Naomi replied softly, I'm not playing a game. I'm just turning on the light. As she stepped out of the station, the late afternoon sunlight draped the street in gold. Ethan Ruiz was waiting, his camera pointed at her. Naomi, he called out. Do you have anything to say to your audience? Over 2 million views in 3 hours, people are demanding answers. Naomi looked into the lens, her voice low and steady. I don't need outrage. I need evidence. Keep the video, share it, and look closely. This isn't the first time, but it could be the last if we refuse to stay silent. Ethan nodded, eyes glistening. Around them, people began to clap. No one said a word, yet everyone felt it. Something monumental was unfolding. Inside the station, Bennett stared out the window, gripping his glass of whiskey. He could see Walker slumped in a chair, Cooper sitting silently beside him. The public will forget soon enough, he muttered. But just then, his phone buzzed. A news alert flashed on the screen. Bookstore. Justice now trending nationwide. Bennett exhaled slowly. Some waves cannot be stopped. And this one had been set in motion by a woman they once believed they could silence with a single arrest. The news spread faster than anyone could have imagined. In less than 24 hours, Maple Grove was flooded with people banners stretched across the central square. Hundreds gathered outside the Brookdale Police Department, chanting and live streaming to the world. Every phone became an eye and every video an accusation. On the large news screens, Naomi Carter's face appeared beneath the headline, Federal Investigator Illegally Arrested Brookdale Police Accused of Racial Discrimination. In her small 10th floor office, Naomi sat before her laptop, dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep. She silently watched the news as the reporter's voice blended with the chants, echoing from the streets below. Everything had grown far beyond a single personal incident. It had become a symbol. But Naomi felt no thrill of victory. She knew that the media was a double-edged sword, one that could save justice yet just as easily twist the truth into entertainment. Her phone rang. It was Marcus Chen, a former colleague and trusted civil rights attorney. Naomi, you've started a storm. The press is turning you into a symbol and Brookdale is striking back. They're leaking claims that you provoked the situation on purpose for attention. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment. I expected that. The same old strategy, smear, deny, delay. Exactly. And now they're saying you forged your investigation order. Marcus hesitated before continuing, his tone heavy. I think you should leave the city for a few days. Naomi walked to the window, gazing down at the crowd, still chanting her name. No, Marcus. If I leave, they'll say I was afraid. I'm here to make them face themselves. She ended the call, her eyes hardening. She reopened the data she had gathered the night before, lists of arrests, racial breakdowns of traffic stops, and internal reports sent anonymously by a whistleblower. 67% of drivers pulled over had committed no violation. 85% of them were Black or Latino. Naomi exhaled. The truth is always clear, she whispered. People just choose not to see it. Across town, Captain Bennett held an emergency meeting. In a room thick with cigarette smoke, he slammed his hand on the table. We can't let this spread any further. She's destroying the department's reputation. A young officer spoke up nervously. But, sir, the video clearly shows Walker abusing his authority. I don't want to hear it. Walker will be suspended, but only for show. We need to control the narrative first. Meanwhile, Walker sat alone in his car, staring at the flashing news feed on his phone. His face was dark with exhaustion. Beneath every video, thousands of comments cursed him, calling him the face of racism. He struck the steering wheel and hissed through his teeth. She ruined my life. But deep down, he knew he had done that himself. That afternoon, Naomi walked into the regional office of the Department of Justice. Fluorescent lights gleamed down long hallways lined with photographs of landmark civil rights cases. She submitted a detailed report with evidence of obstruction, unlawful seizure of property, and excessive use of force. The intake officer looked up at her, a mix of admiration and concern in her eyes. Dr. Carter, are you sure? If this case opens, it'll reach some very powerful people. Naomi smiled softly. Justice has never been the easy road. As night fell, Naomi sat by her window while rain shimmered against the city lights. On her screen, social media was on fire, bookstore. Justice had hit 10 million views. Beneath one viral clip, Ethan Ruiz had commented, "She's not seeking the spotlight. She just turned it on." Naomi read it, closed her laptop, and whispered, if that light makes them finally look, then even if it burns me, I'll accept it. But in the hidden corners of the night, another plan was forming. Inside Bennett's office, a gray-haired man handed him a sealed envelope. Internal information, he said quietly. We know Carter's digging deeper than expected. If she keeps going, this won't just be a scandal, it'll be a criminal case. Bennett tore open the envelope, his face darkening. Inside were copies of emails between senior officers and his own signature among them. She already has everything, the man warned. Either you regain control, or your career ends here. Bennett was silent for a long time. Then he set the envelope down, staring out the window at the reflection of protest lights flickering through the rain. If justice is what she wants, he said softly, then I'll show her its price. At that same moment, Naomi received an anonymous email. Don't trust anyone in your division. Someone's leaking information. Her heartbeat quickened, but then she smiled faintly. All right, she murmured. Then the real game has just begun. The storm outside had not yet passed, but Naomi Carter understood that within every storm there is a calm center where truth cannot be moved. And she was that center. The next morning, Maple Grove awoke to two conflicting narratives. On one side, national newspapers praised Naomi Carter as the woman who made the system look at itself. On the other, local television aired a statement from the Brookdale Police Department calling the incident at the Thinking Bean an unfortunate misunderstanding and insisting that the officers acted according to proper procedure. In her office at the Department of Justice, Naomi set down her coffee cup, watching the news report with a faint smirk. "Proper procedure," she repeated softly, the favorite excuse of every organized wrongdoing. Her phone rang. The deep, raspy voice on the other end belonged to Lieutenant Aaron Jenkins, whom she had met once at a hearing. "Dr. Carter, I need to see you." "Alone." Naomi hesitated. "Which division are you with, Brookdale?" "But today I'm not speaking as a cop." An hour later, they met in the underground parking garage of the federal building, where the security cameras faced only the exit. Jenkins was tall, broad-shouldered, his hair streaked with gray. He removed his cap, glanced around warily, and spoke in a low voice. "What you think about us, it's worse than that." Naomi stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. "Have you heard of the blacklist?" He unlocked his phone and handed it to her. On the screen were photos of internal emails, lists of names belonging to people who had filed complaints against the police or cooperated in investigations. At the top was Naomi Carter's name. Below it, Jamal Thomas, the high school principal, who had withdrawn his testimony. Next to each name was a note monitor activity. Warn against contact. Naomi stared at the screen. "Who started this list?" "Orders from above," Jenkins said quietly, directly from Captain Bennett. A chill ran down Naomi's spine. "I need copies of everything she said," firmly. Jenkins nodded and pulled a small USB drive from his pocket. "Everything's in here. Internal correspondence, including Bennett's directives to Officers Walker and Cooper." "Be careful. They're desperate, and when power feels cornered, it bites back." Naomi gripped the USB tightly, feeling its cold, heavy weight in her palm. "Why are you helping me?" Jenkins looked away, his voice rough. 18 years on the force. I've seen too many people destroyed for telling the truth. I've been silent long enough." He turned and walked off his shadow, merging with the dim light of the garage, leaving Naomi alone with the quickened breath of someone who had just opened a forbidden door. That night, Naomi sat alone in her apartment. She plugged the USB into her laptop, and one by one, the files opened like fresh wounds. Hundreds of emails, internal notes, surveillance orders. Then she saw it, messages between Bennett and Walker. "If Carter appears in Maple Grove, report immediately. Don't let her stir things up." Another line read, "Ensure the incident is handled within legal limits." Naomi's heart pounded. The incident, that was her. And within legal limits meant they would do anything as long as it wasn't caught on camera. She uploaded everything to the federal encryption system and called Marcus Chen. "I have internal evidence of retaliation," she said quickly. "We need to expand the case. This isn't just racial discrimination anymore. It's systemic collusion." Marcus was silent for a few seconds before replying. "Naomi, if what you're saying is true, this isn't a civil case anymore. It's federal crime territory." At that moment, the lights in her apartment flickered and went out. The laptop screen blinked once and went black. Naomi jumped to her feet. She heard faint footsteps in the hallway. Her pulse quickened, every sense heightened. Grabbing her phone, she tapped an emergency code that sent a distress signal to the federal office. A shadow passed by the door. Naomi stayed calm, pulling a pen from her pocket, the one with a hidden recording device inside. A soft knock followed. A man's voice said, "Ms. Carter, I'm with maintenance. The building had a power outage." Naomi said nothing, peering through the peephole. The man wore a uniform, but no name tag. She raised her voice steady and clear. "If you're really maintenance, wait for the federal agents to verify your identity." Silence. Then fading footsteps. A minute later, the lights came back on. Her laptop rebooted, but a new message flashed across the screen. "Unauthorized external access detected." Naomi bit her lip. They were trying to erase the evidence. She quickly disconnected from the internet, transferred all files to a separate hard drive, and sent Marcus a message. "They know. Prepare to file sooner than planned." That night, she barely slept. Every creak in the hallway, every flicker of light through the blinds made her open her eyes. But there was no fear left, only absolute clarity. This battle had grown far beyond a single city. The next morning, when she opened her door, she found a white envelope lying on the floor. No sender address. Inside was a photo of her standing in the thinking bean, with Walker in the background and a scrawled message. Sometimes truth can vanish like a deleted file. Naomi clenched the photo in her hand, her eyes blazing. "No," she whispered. "Truth doesn't vanish. It just waits for someone brave enough to hold on to it." She turned away, the USB drive tucked safely in her coat pocket. Today, she would walk into the federal courthouse to file an expanded lawsuit. And once those courtroom doors closed, Brookdale would have nowhere left to hide its darkness. That morning, the federal courthouse in downtown Maple Grove gleamed beneath the new sunlight, every marble step glowing with an almost invisible energy, the energy of truths on the verge of being exposed. Naomi Carter walked in with her head high, her posture straight, her face calm but cold. In her hand was a thick folder containing Lieutenant Jenkins's USB drive, the key that would unlock a labyrinth of power rotting from within. She filed the expanded lawsuit with the federal court, the new case name Carter versus City of Brookdale et al. The complaint spanned more than 60 pages, supported by hundreds of pieces of evidence, emails, internal reports, and the secret blacklist of citizens unlawfully monitored by the police department. When the court clerk stamped the filing and signed it, Naomi felt as if she had just pulled the trigger of a gun, with truth as its first bullet. Leaving the courthouse, she lifted her gaze to the clear sky, the sunlight glinting off her hair like threads of steel. Across the city, others were beginning to feel the tremor of that shot. Inside the Brookdale Police Department, Captain Bennett slammed a newspaper onto his desk, his voice sharp and furious. "She's suing the entire city." Walker stood nearby, pale and shaking. "Sir," could it be that Jenkins quiet Bennett barked. "If he talks, we're all finished." He snatched up his phone, dialing quickly. "Get me the city council now. We need to contain this before it reaches Washington." That evening, Naomi met with Marcus Chen in a small office buried under stacks of files. Ethan Ruiz was there too, camera in hand. He had learned that the police chief was planning an internal cover-up by launching a smear campaign against Naomi. "They're about to spread rumors that you fabricated evidence," Ethan said, worry in his eyes. "I can release Jenkins's documents first as a counterattack." Naomi shook her head. "Not yet. If we release them now, they'll call it an illegal leak. I need the court to verify the data's authenticity first. Then we'll use it as evidence, not as a weapon." Marcus nodded slowly. "You always know when to strike and when to wait." Naomi's voice softened. "Because I've spent my life fighting battles where silence was the only way to survive." That night, Naomi left the office late. On her drive home, she noticed a black SUV following, closely matching her speed through two intersections. She didn't look back, only tapped her phone to send her live location to Marcus. At a red light, she glanced into the rearview mirror. Two men sat in the SUV, staring straight at her, their eyes cold, Not hateful, just delivering a message. "We're watching." Naomi didn't speed up or stop. She turned calmly into a crowded shopping center parked in the underground garage and slipped quietly into the crowd. She knew she couldn't be afraid. Fear was how they won. The next morning, the headlines erupted. "Whistleblower reveals illegal surveillance by Brookdale Police Department." Below the article, the city spokesperson claimed there is no evidence of unlawful activity. But hours later, independent media released excerpts from the USB, including an email bearing Captain Bennett's digital signature. The news spread like fire across a dry field. The federal court officially announced a full-scale investigation. That same day, 3 officers resigned and anonymously submitted statements supporting Naomi. One of them revealed that the blacklist wasn't just for surveillance, it was used to rank threat levels and required interventions. Naomi read those words, a chill running down her spine. "They turned the law into a tool for control," she said quietly, and called it order. That evening, Ethan arrived at her apartment, urgency written across his face. "Naomi, there's something you need to see. I found the personnel file for the cafe manager at the Thinking Bean, Thomas Kane. He's Bennett's cousin." She looked up sharply. "Are you sure positive? I even found his hiring record 3 weeks before your incident." Everything snapped into place. In Naomi's mind, the suspicious call, the 2 officers from her investigation showing up Bennett's reactions, and now the family connection. There was no doubt the so-called misunderstanding at the cafe had been orchestrated. Naomi rose her tone low, but resolute. "They tried to stage an incident to discredit me, but they picked the wrong woman." She glanced at Ethan with a faint, determined smile. "Now you can release it, all of it. The more public it is, the harder it is for them to erase." Within hours, the story of the orchestrated arrest plot flooded every platform. Thousands shared Ethan's post under a new hashtag, Justice for Carter. Inside the Brookdale office, Bennett hurled his phone onto the desk, his whiskey glass trembling in his hand. "We've been hit in broad daylight," he growled. Walker stared at the floor, sweat beading on his temples. "Sir, if Jenkins cooperates, we—" "You don't get it, do you?" Bennett snapped, eyes blazing. "She already has everything, and once justice takes form, no one can bury it." Meanwhile, Naomi sat in her small apartment, the warm light reflecting in her tired but burning eyes. She opened her laptop and began writing the next section of the lawsuit. "We allege that the Brookdale Police Department deliberately orchestrated an arrest to discredit a federal investigator and conceal systemic racial discrimination." Her hands paused for a second, then continued typing. "Justice needs no victor, only those who refuse to bow." Outside, the city sank into night. But tonight, darkness did not close in on Naomi Carter. She was the one making the darkness afraid of her light. A week later, Maple Grove was no longer just a city mentioned in brief news segments. It had become the center of national attention. Countless feature reports, podcasts, and talk shows dissected the name Naomi Carter, calling her a symbol of courage in a world built on excuses. Meanwhile, the federal court officially opened its first full hearing. Naomi entered the courtroom wearing a charcoal gray suit, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, her shadow stretching long across the tiled floor. Every eye followed her. What she felt wasn't fear, but the weight of hundreds of silent voices standing behind her. Across the room, the city's legal team filled an entire table, led by James Harrington, a seasoned attorney known for defending government agencies. He gave a faint smile, his gaze sharp and calculating. When the judge declared the session open, Naomi stood, her voice deep but resonant. Today is not about the case of one person. It is about whether justice still means something more than an empty promise. The courtroom fell silent. Marcus Chen presented the evidence: internal emails, Bennett's directives, the blacklist, and Lieutenant Jenkins's testimony. Harrington countered, claiming the documents were unverified, but Naomi was ready. She called Jenkins to the stand. The older man walked slowly to the front, holding printed copies of the emails with digital signatures. "I've seen what we did to our citizens," he said, his voice gravelly. "We called it protecting order, but it was suppression. And we did it under orders." Harrington tried to interrupt, but the judge raised a hand for silence. Naomi stepped forward, asking calmly, "Can you confirm that the surveillance orders were signed by Captain Harold Bennett?" "Yes," Jenkins replied. A collective sigh swept through the audience. Naomi turned toward Harrington. "That is the truth. And the truth, no matter how it's twisted, carries its own weight." As she returned to her seat, a reporter's phone buzzed with breaking news. Bennett had just been placed on temporary suspension. The courtroom stirred, voices rising like waves. The judge's gavel struck for order, but Naomi knew the wave wouldn't stop. Outside, hundreds gathered on the courthouse steps, holding signs that read, "Justice is watching." Ethan Ruiz was live streaming, his voice trembling as he watched Naomi emerge. "This is history in the making," he said. "One woman has made an entire system bow to the truth." Naomi looked at the crowd, the wind lifting strands of her hair. She didn't smile. She simply said softly, "This is not victory. This is the beginning." As she descended the courthouse steps, the sunset spilled across her shoulders, casting a golden hue over the entire city. In her heart, one thing was certain. Justice was not the end of the fight. It was the reason to keep fighting. 3 days after the hearing, Maple Grove seemed to be holding its breath. The press no longer called Naomi Carter the federal investigator, but the woman who rekindled faith in justice. Inside City Hall, those who once saw her as an enemy were now in panic. 2 more anonymous officers submitted statements, confirming that Bennett not only ordered the staged arrest of Naomi, but also commanded the deletion of internal records belonging to those who had reported police misconduct. The news spread rapidly, forcing the mayor to call an emergency meeting. That same morning, Bennett was escorted out of headquarters in silence, his face ashen. In front of television cameras, he was no longer the powerful man he once was, but a fallen symbol of arrogance. Naomi felt no triumph. She knew that removing one man would not be enough to change an entire system. Together with Marcus, she formed an oversight committee for reform, demanding that every arrest be accompanied by video evidence and the presence of community representatives. When the new policy proposal was introduced, many young officers approached her asking to join training programs on professional ethics. Naomi realized that not everyone within the system was rotten. Sometimes even a small crack in the door was enough for the light to come through. One evening, Ethan Ruiz came to see her, handing her a handwritten note. "Naomi, someone wanted you to have this." She opened it and saw the sender's name, Michael Cooper Walker's former partner. In the brief letter, he confessed, "We were wrong. I will testify. I want people to know that not all of us chose silence." Naomi read the words, then looked up, her eyes glistening. She whispered softly, "That is the real victory, when someone chooses what's right, even if it's late." The next day, she returned to the federal courthouse to submit additional documents. As she signed her name on the papers, she felt a gentle warmth spread through her fingertips, a silent confirmation that this journey was far from over. Outside, the sun was rising radiant and clear. And for the first time in many years, Naomi Carter felt that light was no longer something distant. It was shining from within her own heart. A year later, Maple Grove had changed almost beyond recognition. The street where the thinking bean incident once happened had become a symbol of reconciliation, its cafe wall now painted with a mural of Naomi Carter standing in sunlight, surrounded by hundreds of faces of people from every background. The cafe had been renamed the Open Table, a place where, at the end of each month, justice talks were held between police officers and community members. Naomi often sat quietly in the back row, watching young officers learn how to listen instead of command. The reform program she and Marcus had initiated had since been adopted by more than 20 cities, requiring all police departments to make racial data public and to be subject to independent oversight. The changes hadn't come overnight, but step by step they turned the promise of justice into something real. Naomi was now director of the State Office of Civil Rights, yet she still lived in her old apartment in Maple Grove. Every morning she jogged past the central square, where a new monument stood, not a statue of a hero, but an empty chair engraved with the words, "For those who dared to stand." It was the idea of Ethan Ruiz, now a political correspondent, who still referred to Naomi as the woman who taught me that truth needs no weapon, only to be seen. That afternoon, Naomi stood in the auditorium at Lincoln University, speaking before hundreds of law students. She didn't use a prepared speech, only told a story that began with a latte and a deliberate misunderstanding. Her voice was steady and deep, each word cutting through the air. Justice is not something that's given. It's something we must demand every single day, even when it means facing our own fear. I am not a hero. I am simply someone who stopped being silent. The students rose in applause, some with tears in their eyes. Naomi looked at them and saw in their faces the same hope she had once lost years ago. When the ceremony ended, Marcus approached and placed a small envelope in her hand. "It's from the federal court," he said. Naomi opened it. Inside was the final ruling on her case, the judgment approving her entire petition and ordering a mandatory 10-year reform of the Brookdale Police Department. She smiled not out of triumph, but because it marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Late that night, Naomi returned to the Open Table. The cafe glowed with warm yellow light, filled with laughter, and the hum of conversations about the past and the future. She sat in her familiar corner, took a sip of latte, and said softly to Ethan, "That day, I only wanted them to see me as a human being. I never imagined that in the end, we would all learn to see each other." Ethan nodded, his voice quiet, but certain. "That's what true justice is, Naomi, when no one has to prove they deserve respect." Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, scattering leaves onto the dew-soaked pavement. Naomi gazed out at the street, the reflections of the lights shimmering in her eyes like 1,000 small stars. She knew the fight was far from over, but tonight she felt only peace. Standing, she turned to Ethan with a faint smile. "If anyone asks why I never stopped, tell them it's because I never started for recognition. I started for people." Then she looked straight into his camera, her tone soft, but resolute. "If you've ever witnessed injustice and thought your voice was too small, remember sometimes it only takes one person brave enough to speak to change the world. if this story makes you believe that share it, pass it on. Because justice only exists when we protect it together.